Do employers care where you went to college? That is, just how much do employers care on the other side where you graduated from? To support this series, to support this channel, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe. Let's dive into it. To answer this question, let's start with a rather peculiar experiment. This is Thomas Brennan. Thomas Brennan is a former Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, and Thomas also writes a well-known publication for lawyers. And he asked these lawyers one time to do him a favor. He asked them to rank law schools in terms of quality. So he included all the big name schools like Harvard, like Yale, University of Michigan. He also included the lesser known schools like John Marshall. So the lawyers ranked the schools. And one school ended up being fifth, Penn State, which at first glance, doesn't really come as much of a surprise. Penn State has a good reputation. It's a well-known great state school. Until you realize something a little strange about this. Penn State didn't have a law school. So why were they fifth? And this is often a popular argument for choosing a more selective school, a more often expensive school. These selective schools, well, they carry assumptions with them, and we all carry assumptions, we all carry bias, and if people are going to screen us, if employers are going to screen us, and that's going to decide what interviews we get down the road, well, why wouldn't you want to go to a more selective school? You might hate the perception, the bias that's there, but if this ultimately determines what opportunities you get, what doors are unlocked, that name on the degree, there might not be much you can do about it. And you might want to go to that more selective, expensive school because it might be more worth it. Even apparently if the school doesn't exist. Now this is an example of prejudice. You can look at the definition of prejudice. This is as close as it gets, but I don't think these lawyers are intentionally prejudiced. I don't think they're malevolent, evil human beings for putting a law school that didn't exist at the time in the top 10. I don't think anybody signs up to be embarrassed, which it's kind of embarrassing if you're a lawyer ranking a school in the top 10 that doesn't exist. But you have to wonder, just how much does this prejudice impact life on the other side of college? Just how important is the name on that degree when it comes to future success? So there's a lot of information out there like this.
These days, it's not just a matter of how many years of education you have, but where you went to college. And that's why this brands is a way to distinguish yourself.
But then you also have people saying this.
There is no data anywhere, none, that says that the prestige of your school, your college or university, has anything to do with your success in business. There's no data. They don't care.
So who's right? To answer that question, we got to get away from the feelings, the feels, the emotionally driven decision-making that can cloud our judgment. We need to get a little bit more objective here. Get away from the sound bites.
It is the #1 school in colleges that pay you back.
And focus on the data. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of interesting, one could say, or just bad data. But fortunately for you, I have spent quite a bit of time going through this data. I'm going to share my findings with you. And hopefully, we can use some of these studies to better arm ourselves to make a more qualified decision when it comes to choosing a college. So let's just say you start this whole journey off in the same way we seem to start journeys, and that is via a Google search. You say, well, heck, I just want to know, do employers care where I went to college? The first study that you're going to be met with is done by intelligent.com, and it cites that 84% of hiring managers believe that where a candidate attended college is of great importance. I did a little bit more digging because I was just curious, okay, hey, what was their methodology in determining this 84% number? That's a high number. How did they come up with it? And there wasn't a whole lot of clarity. I mean, they did mention they used an online survey platform called Pollster, but again, for what that's worth, I don't know if that really helps us here. I even emailed the woman that they mentioned to email for further questions on the data. I did not hear back. Maybe they'll see this video and they will email me back. But there just isn't enough information here to cite that this source is worthwhile. Despite it being #1 on the Google SEO charts, I don't think there's enough information here to say, yeah, you should take this as gospel. You should truly weight this survey in your college decision. Although, again, if someone were to just Google this, they'd see, well, yeah, employers are really going to care. I think we need to move on to another study unless we hear more in the future about this one. Another study done by Investopedia found surprising results. They found that private school graduates made more than public school graduates, who made more than Ivy League graduates. Ivy League graduates were in last place. They were making less money than both public and private school graduates, even though Ivy League are private graduates. So I was a little surprised by this, because that is counterintuitive and also goes against all the traditional headlines that you see. Ivy League graduates going on to make more money. It didn't take too many steps in to realize why this data set was so skewed. For the comparison, they weren't taking the aggregate. They weren't taking all the public 4 years. They weren't taking all the private 4 years. They were taking the top 8 public 4 years and also the top 8 private 4 years and comparing those against the Ivy League. And when you do this, well, you naturally get STEM-heavy, engineering-heavy colleges such as MIT, which, if those schools are just catering to the highest paying majors, which they are, naturally it's going to look like those schools are performing magic, which, somebody could argue that, but, somebody like me is just like, well, hey, they don't have maybe as many photography graduates. They have maybe more engineering graduates. And that's why their earnings are significantly higher. It makes the school look like it's just producing these high income earning kids, when in reality, they're just producing majors in this case for fields that are in demand and pay more. So that isn't necessarily a fair comparison in my book. I think a better comparison would have been all of the private 4 years, all of the public 4 years versus the Ivy League, and maybe even control, if you want, take a step further for those engineering heavy, STEM heavy schools, but they didn't do that. So this unfortunately doesn't really help us out either. I also stumbled upon this study, except they used the sticker price and not the net price. So naturally schools like Denver, like Dayton, like Boston University fell into the terrible business decision category because, well, they have astronomically high sticker prices. Except these schools award typically heaps of financial aid or merit aid, and the average cost of attendance is significantly lower. So what's more important at the end of the day? What the cost is advertised as, or what you actually pay? I believe it's what you actually pay. Now, of course, this is subjective to your situation. This is where our tools are significantly helpful for kids and significantly helpful for families, because you can instantaneously compare any school based on your situation and see what the net cost is. But that means that this comparison, again, is just not really fair. And it's not really helpful for us to determine, hey, does the name, brand, and degree really affect your employment on the other side, your potential income on the other side? We need to take a few more steps further. So hopefully me taking the time to point out these bad data sets, these comical studies, is helpful so you don't get misled. But I want to pause here and I want to maybe pursue a little bit different pathway with you real quick. One that is supported by the most legitimate study, the most fair study I've seen in this field. And we'll see if this can maybe help us answer the question, do employers care about where you graduated on the other side? So to begin, let's imagine that we're cloning ourselves at 18. One of these clones is going to go to a more selective school, and the other is going to go to a less selective school. The question is, after 4 years, who emerges victorious on the other side? Who maybe has higher earnings? So this cloning would theoretically allow us to get close to something called ceteris paribus, which is a Latin phrase for all else being equal. Basically what it means is it allows us to isolate for certain causation, right? So we could see how much of an impact, for example, college choice has on future earnings potential or potential job opportunities if we could do this, but we can't. So the next closest thing, besides cloning ourselves, is setting controls, which I mentioned in a previous video is what Dale and Kruger did. They set controls, normal controls, such as SAT scores, such as demographics, to see, okay, hey, do private school graduates make more or do public school graduates make more? And what they found was private school graduates still made more, but they applied one more control. And this control had to deal with the average SAT score of the school applied. And when they did this, there was no statistical difference in income. The economists found that the earnings of the two groups 20 years after graduation differed little or not at all. And a larger follow-up study that looked at 19,000 graduates found the exact same results. So if we come back to our cloning example and we imagine that one version of yourself, one clone decides to go to a higher ranked, better business school, and the other version of yourself, the other clone, goes to a lower ranked, less selective business school. Well, after 4 years, if you followed the same pathway there, at least you went into the same field, you went to the same major, we would find no statistical difference theoretically in earnings on the other side. I mean, if we use law of large numbers. Now, there might be some special circumstance for you, some subjective circumstance that is really just singular to your situation, but law of large numbers would show us that there's not really any special sauce here. There's not some magic formula that more selective school is going to have on average, according to this study, which I believe to be the most fair study. And this is actually a very good thing. Then, of course, there's other measures like job satisfaction. That's important. I mean, how much do you actually enjoy your job? And Greg Easterbrook looked into this quite deeply, and he found that students that attended an elite college did not enjoy their job really any more than students that went to a less selective college. It had little to no impact. That's probably worth noting here as well, because most of us want to enjoy what we do. Now, 50, 60 years ago, elite colleges had a demonstrable difference. But as is the case with many competitive landscapes, many profitable landscapes, such as college, where there's thousands of colleges, over time, the playing field tends to level. There are many great colleges. So if we pull back a little bit here and we take a look at these different studies, yes, hiring managers may say that they care. We don't know if this is fully accurate, where you graduated from. At least it might hold significant importance, high importance for that first job. But the most legitimate study in this field that controlled in an accurate way, the most fair way, I believe, found that there was no statistical job difference in the two most important categories, earnings and satisfaction. How much do you enjoy it and how much do you make? There was no significant difference in this case for our clones. When we had two of the same groups compared, there wasn't really much of a difference there. So that is helpful for us because it means, hey, maybe you shouldn't shell out a heck of a lot more money for a more selective school just to get that name on your degree. So while this study may be helpful in showing us that employers might not necessarily care what name is on the degree when we apply the understandable controls, it still leaves us with this understandable big question. How do you choose what college is right for you? Sometimes discovering what you want is discovering what you don't want. And hopefully me going through the flaws and a lot of the logic that's out there and a lot of these different studies, a lot of these different numbers you see, the sound bites you hear from people, hopefully me going through these studies has been helpful from a process of elimination standpoint. That is, reaching for a more selective school just to get the name on the degree and paying significantly more for that, that might not be in your best interests. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't strive for a better tomorrow. You should position yourself for better opportunities by working hard in building a quality resume in college. What I'm saying is intellectual fuel is finite. We only have so much of it. And when you exhaust all of it just on trying to impress others, for example, getting a name on a degree so that others maybe think of you differently, you might be left feeling empty. And at the end of the day, I think what's going to happen is you'll just keep moving the goalposts back. It'll move from how do I get this name brand degree to how do I get this job that's going to impress others and just look great on my resume to how do I get this house that's just going to impress others so that people know how successful I am, how well I'm doing. You're just going to keep moving the goalposts back. My final note on this: there will always be conflicting perceptions when it comes to college. There will likely never be an agreed upon reality. But that doesn't make it any different than any other big decision in your life, which means you need to collect the different perceptions, collect the relevant information for this decision, and make the best decision for yourself, not for some 200-year-old name on a piece of paper. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this video. We put a lot of work into it. We got several coming down the pipeline we're excited about. Hope you enjoyed.